Today, when we think as Jews of the old country, most Jews, for instance, in America are Ashkenazic Jews, Jews who come from the non-Arabic, the Christian part of Europe. And even though the percentage of Sephardic Jews in the United States is definitely on the rise, most Jews in America have thought throughout history, when we think of the old country, we think of Eastern Europe. But we don't realize that that's not such an old country for Jews. Most people aren't aware that up until 500 years ago, the majority of the Jewish world was living in the Muslim world, mostly in Spain, which we don't consider as a Muslim country, but before the Reconquest in 1492, it was for 700 years a Muslim country. But we have a huge growth in the Ashkenazic Jewish community. 1,000 years ago, 90% of the Jews in the world were living in the Arab Muslim world. In the last 500 years, we had a huge rapid shift when Jews were expelled or fled from either Spain or countries in Western Europe to Poland, to the life of the shtetl that we come to envision when we think about life in Eastern Europe, of Fiddler on the Roof and Tevye the Milkman. And we see the community grows tremendously. In 1500, there were maybe 50,000 Jews living in what is today Poland. Within 150 years, that number will jump to 500,000 Jews. That Eastern Europe, which becomes later part of Tsarist Russia, before the great exodus of Jews in 1881-82, there'll be over 5 million Jews living there. That really is, I would say, the second to last great diaspora community in the world will be that Eastern European community, followed later by the United States. But it's an amazing community because it started out as Jews coming in invited by the Poles, the Polish nobility, to help run the country, and they brought tremendous prosperity to Poland. And later it's absorbed in the 18th century by Tsarist Russia, where there never was a golden age. It was always bad for Jews in Russia. And later the situation degenerates to a very bad situation of Jews living in the shtetls, of tremendous persecution and of poverty. But the most interesting aspect of the shtetl living was the fact that even though the Jews lived for hundreds of years in a very difficult situation in the world's largest ghetto, 386,000 square miles of Eastern Europe, forcibly kept in poverty, it's one of the great creative periods of Jewish history, where many great rabbis, yeshivot, and tremendous Jewish learning came out of that. And that really shows us one of the most interesting aspects of Jewish culture and the uniqueness of the Jewish people. Most people, when they are stressed out by external factors like persecution and economic deprivation, will go into a regressive state when they don't produce much intellectually, culturally, economically. But the Jewish people often, even in the worst states, we see this in medieval Europe at the period of time of Rashi. And we also see it jumping ahead to Eastern Europe of Tsarist Russia, one of the greatest periods of Jewish scholarship. And in many ways, despite the poverty and the persecution, one of the golden ages of the Jewish people spiritually and creatively was precisely in this period of time, Eastern Europe, that we know as the shtetl, that giant pale of Jewish settlement in the last few hundred years before most of those Jews left for the United States.